Welcome to Unbelievable Stories. Today's story is full of shocking twists and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in.
I stood at the small wooden podium, surrounded by chairs in a circle. Talking in front of people had always been hard for me ever since school. My legs were shaky, and I was scared my voice might crack as I glanced at the 18 men in the room. I took a deep breath to calm myself and started. Hi, my name is Mark. I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts before adding, and I am A. I left the words hanging for about 20 seconds, watching how they reacted. Most of them seemed startled, their expressions ranging from disbelief to blank stares, but not one of them smirked at my self-deprecating admission. Well, not really, I added, but being branded that way pisses me off to no end. This is my second meeting, and after listening to half a dozen of you share your stories, I've decided to share mine. Unlike most of you, I'm still married. My lawyer advised me to get counseling for anger management while we work on my divorce case and I get my ducks in a row. So far, it seems to be helping, at least I haven't killed anyone yet. This drew smiles and soft laughter from the group. Before all this started, I didn't think I was a gullible man. I had no idea I was so unobservant, I admitted. I genuinely believed I was a loving husband and, hopefully soon, a proud father. I never considered myself a victim, nor did I ever think of myself as a loser. I wasn't the best at everything I did, but I was always up there in the almost made it category. In high school, I was in the top third of my class academically, and the same went for college. I graduated with a solid 3.4 GPA, more than enough to get into graduate school, where I did fairly well while working as an accountant. After graduation, with a bit more experience under my belt, I landed a good job as a CPA and thought I was on a solid path to success. Then the rug was pulled out from under me. Academic and financial success is one thing, but to have the one thing that defines your core ripped away is the worst a man can face, I said. For your wife to tell you that you are not good enough for her, well, maybe not directly and verbally, but rather in actions, is devastating. I began to hyperventilate. I grabbed the little podium and held on like it was a life raft in a choppy sea. Sorry, I got a little off target there, I said as I regrouped. Two men in the front row gave me a thumbs up and a nod to tell me they understood and for me to keep going. Let me backtrack, I said. I'm not going to start telling you how beautiful my wife is, how big her tits are, and all that. I'm not going to describe our sex life and claim it was super hot and we had monkey sex daily. I will say we were active in bed and seemed to have a great life outside of the bedroom as well. She was my best friend and my life partner, or so I thought. Emma and I met in college the semester before I graduated with my bachelor's degree. We hit it off and married that next summer. I got a decent job right away as an accountant so I could afford to pay for her to finish her degree. Then after the year of work experience I needed, I went on to get my CPA while Emma became a paralegal. Lately, she has announced aspirations to go to law school. I snorted. Good luck with that. I will not be the one paying for it. That got a few chuckles from the audience. With 2 sets of college loans, we held off having kids or even buying a house until we both felt comfortable we could afford the expense, I said. Last year, after 4.5 years of marriage, we bought an older 4-bedroom home and I completely remodeled it. I gutted the interior to the studs and even changed up the floor plan to suit us. I turned it into just what Emma and I envisioned as our future home. My older brother is a contractor who specializes in remodeling older homes and turning them into the dream his clients envision. I worked for him every summer while in school, so I felt I had the abilities needed to get a house and rebuild it to make it the best it could be. My brother helped me when I began and even got his subcontractors to give me special rates for those things outside of my own expertise. Of course, several of those contractors were already my accounting clients, so part of the work was quid pro quo. In other words, I don't have a whole lot of money tied up in the house itself, but the value if I sold it now would be triple what we have invested in it. Emma got her dream home and seemed thrilled and content. 6 months ago, she announced she was ready to get pregnant, and it only took 6 weeks before she disclosed she was with child. I should be over the moon, and at first, I was. The thing is, the baby is not mine, or at least I am pretty sure it is not, and at this point in time, I sincerely hope I am right. I admit it, I'm not exactly sure how long my wife has been cheating on me, but looking back, I suspect off and on for much of the past year, at least. She had ample time to stray while I busted my hump working as an accountant and renovating our future home evenings and weekends. Now, I'm sure many of you wonder how I found out about Emma's activities. I got several nods. Nothing like some of you guys know late nights, quick showers when the woman came home, guys' underwear under the bed, or anything like that. It started with a simple phone call. I overheard her talking to someone on the phone while she was in the bedroom and thought she was alone. She and whoever were talking about what to pack for an upcoming business trip. Hearing Emma's side, I surmised she was talking to a woman. What caught my attention was when Emma said something about how the woman should bring her big strap on and how she might not be able to take really rough sex for too much longer. She said something like, "Yeah, I know you told me I can get hard sex until just weeks before I deliver, but this is my first kid. I haven't popped out two already like you have, and I'm not sure how much longer I can take, and Luke at the same time." Now, I knew Luke is her boss's first name. She continued and laughed, "Luke is barely as big as Mark." Of course, I love it, damn girl, you know that. But this baby bump is really starting to show. I'm going to have to start buying new clothes soon. Nope, I still haven't got myself tested. I'm a little nervous it might be Luke's kid. Oh yeah, he had sex with me more times than Mark in the past 5 months, and the timing is about right for that meeting in Dallas. Plus, Mark was coming home too late at night and too tired to really please me like I wanted around then. I was at my most fertile time, and Mark never caught on. I saw a series of grins around the room. Okay, I know some of you are thinking I'm making this up, that I couldn't possibly remember a conversation with that much detail, especially if I was upset. Well, I've listened to that conversation dozens of times in the past few weeks. I recorded it on my cell phone, I said. I saw a few nods and expressions change from obvious skepticism to acceptance. I called a security guy my brother uses for help. He installed a couple of cameras and recording devices, plus provided a few I could put in her purse and briefcase. I caught her screwing in my bed a few times while I was at work and got some interesting audio conversations. She's doing both her boss and the secretary, often at the same time. The secretary, Sophie, is married with a couple of kids. From what I gather, they do threesomes when they can, and the boss often does one or the other woman at work. Sometimes the women play together. You gotta wonder how they get any work done, from the sound of it. I want to bring up one thing the doc asked me. He asked me to try to get into Emma's head so I could understand her motivation to step outside of our marriage for sex. If perhaps she was frustrated with our long hours apart and she needed some physical and emotional contact to make up for it. Well, I'll tell you all the same thing I told him: I don't care. She cheated, simple as that. If she was feeling lonely or horny, she could easily have said something, asked for a little more us time. But she didn't. She decided to go off and get laid. The reason is moot. Okay, that's about all I have. Thank you for letting me vent. I am in the process now of divorcing her. She left this morning for another out-of-town meeting with some corporate client, and yes, the boss and secretary are going. I concluded my talk. Before I stepped away from the podium, one of the men, a big grizzled guy, spoke up. "Why didn't you go stomp a mud hole in the guy's butt?" Of course, I have no idea who did it as I wasn't there and had a good alibi, I said, smirking. But the guy who was screwing my ex got his jaw broken and stomped to a pulp. Nobody saw a thing. Random attack, according to the cops. There was laughter all around. I told them I hadn't even confronted the soon-to-be ex-wife yet. I was still in the process of making plans. I got some incredulous looks. The main reason I'm even here at these meetings is to keep a lid on my rage. Oh, I can't tell you I haven't imagined using a baseball bat or even putting a few bullets in Luke's butt, but I'm not about to risk jail. And that macho crap of standing up and fighting for my woman like a man is just that crap. She's not my woman if she doesn't want to act like it. Another guy asked, after hearing the conversation, "Did you start paying attention to see if your wife was different after sex with others?" "I haven't touched her since the night I overheard that conversation," I said. "I got COVID that night and tested positive. I've been sleeping in the guest room ever since, quarantining." Matter of fact, I might have the record for testing positive for 2 weeks. Actually, I looked it up online, and it says in some cases I could be positive for a month. And with the pregnancy, it's just safer for me to sleep in another room, I added, grinning. I got some smiles and thumbs up. A couple of guys said they would have screwed her up and made it hurt. I stepped away from the podium. The group moderator, the therapist, stepped forward and thanked me for being honest and sharing. He asked me to continue to come to the open meetings as well as our private counseling sessions. I told him I'd consider it. I might need to blow off more steam later, but for now, the lion was kept in its cage. I had only gone to him at my attorney's insistence. My lawyer said I was on the edge of losing it and needed a relief valve. Just making plans to divorce Emma wasn't enough to temper my anger. Unlike an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, these meetings ended with everybody having a drink. We all adjourned to the bar down the block. "So, you haven't even told her you know she's cheating?" one guy asked incredulously. I shook my head. "Damn," he said. I blew up, slapped my 35-year-old wife down, and then chased the asshole out the door. Of course, she told me she was going out on a date with the guy when he walked in the door to pick her up. He was standing there grinning when she told me she was going out and probably wouldn't be back until the next morning. If he wasn't so damn fast, I might have killed him. I was kicking in his car door, trying to get to him when the cops arrived. That's why I'm in these meetings, mandated by the court for anger management. "How about these other guys?" I asked, curious. "Are they in the same boat?" Reason I ask is that some seem to be getting off on hearing my story. I wonder if any are here for the prospects. The guy gave me a blank look and said, "Prospects?" "Yeah, you know, like the old joke, a teenager goes to confession and admits he had sex with a girl at school. The priest asks if it was Mary Johnson. The kid says no. The priest asks if it was Charlotte Miller. Again, no. The priest asks about a third girl, Joan Brown. Again, no. So the priest tells the kid to say 10 Hail Marys. The kid steps outside and his friend who has been waiting asks him what the priest said. The kid says, "He told me to say 10 Hail Marys and gave me 3 good prospects." The other guys at the table laughed. "You seem like a stand-up guy," one guy said. "If later you want somebody to do a little butt kicking while you're in church in front of a bunch of witnesses, let me know." I asked him how he knew I wasn't a cop setting him up. "Because I work for your brother on occasion as a sheetrock subcontractor. I remember seeing you on the job a while back. You probably don't recognize me 'cause I used to have a big beard and longer hair. Too noticeable, if you know what I mean." I made a mental note to ask my brother for the guy's story sometime. I told him I was still just getting everything together like my lawyer advised, then I'd have her served and go from there. I limited myself to 2 beers. I was surprised at how much better I felt as I drove home. Maybe there really was something to that, letting people, even total strangers, know your troubles. Crap, confession or letting your demons out may be good for the soul, but I had work to get done. I was on a mission. Like I told the guys at the meeting, my soon-to-be ex-wife had left for the week with her boss and the secretary, Sophie. They planned to be gone for the whole week to meet with some corporate client. I suspected the work would be finished in a day and a half. I knew it was a farce and knew what they intended long before I was told they might stay to visit the jazz festival on the company dime the following weekend. Emma was going to get comp time so she'd have a few days off the following week if I could get away from my ledgers to spend some us time more. I knew she was just trying to keep me sexually sated and oblivious. 2 weeks later, I walked into the meeting room a little late. The others had taken their seats while the therapist was trying to get the meeting going by talking about how releasing your inner demons verbally was better than lashing out physically and risking criminal or civil consequences. I wasn't trying to make an entrance, but the room broke into cheers as soon as I stepped inside. "Glad to have you back, Mark. I know these guys want to hear the rest of the story from the man himself," my therapist announced. "Okay," I said, grinning, expressing a happiness I did not feel inside. I was, however, content for the moment. I stepped up to the podium. "A couple weeks ago, I told you my tale about how my wife was cheating on me with her boss, possibly even pregnant by him. Not only that, but the legal secretary was also involved, and the 3 apparently enjoyed threesomes whenever they could. Well, today I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. When I related what I knew to you guys, I had not told the a-hole's wife nor the husband of the other woman anything I had found out. Not that they didn't deserve to know, but I didn't want them to overreact and blow my plans out of the water. I wanted to give my wife the screwing of her life. Not sexually, because she would have enjoyed that. I waited until Thursday night of that week before telling either of the others what our spouses were doing while away. I apologized for my delay, explained why, and then told them I was going to have Emma served at the airport upon their arrival back on Saturday afternoon. I suggested they contact attorneys and gave them my lawyer's name. I asked them not to call or text their spouses and reveal they had been caught. After the initial shock wore off a bit, we started to talk. I found out, like in my case, each of the cheaters called home every night to say how much they missed us and wished they were home. We all knew we were being fed a load of crap. At my urging, Olivia, Luke's wife, decided to take her kids to visit her sister and brother-in-law up in Riverside. She was going to confide in them and have them come back and be with her when she confronted her husband upon his return. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he cheated. She has 2 teenage kids she had to contend with as well. Ethan, Sophie's husband, couldn't get out of work for the weekend. He runs the maintenance department for a Nissan dealership here in town. He did promise not to call his wife, Sophie. He said he wanted to choke her to death without witnesses. I told him about this group and how it helped me to subdue those same impulses. I got a bit of laughter. Anyway, I told both Olivia and Ethan what I did with my finances and explained why. Removing a significant share of our savings and checking account balances, etc. In my case that wasn't much, but they each admitted to having a fair amount in their accounts. I told them I wasn't going to cancel my credit cards until the last minute but would pay the bill out of the joint account to make sure my wife paid her half. I left them to stew on what they needed to do and went home. I'm sure you guys heard what I did at home and it's all true. I got cheers and applause. I took a half bow. Yes, I spent the week dismantling my home. By dismantling, I mean I took it apart but didn't damage a single item. Some of you might remember from my earlier explanation, but I did most of the work renovating my house myself, with a little of my brother's help. What I did was take back that work. I reversed it. I had to leave the sheetrock up with the texture and paint, but the carpet and the air conditioning system were about all I left untouched. I disconnected every appliance and moved it away from the wall. The stove, dishwasher, and refrigerator were all unplugged, and even the connecting wiring harnesses were removed. Every bit of hardware was carefully bagged and attached to the appliance. I even took out the garbage disposal and left it in the middle of the kitchen floor with the sink and faucets all taken apart and removed. I decided to leave the kitchen cabinets. I could have taken them down and did take a few that 2 of us could lift easily after loosening the retaining bolts, but that was just to show the soon-to-be ex her pretty kitchen was no more. I also left the kitchen counters alone as I had used a one-piece system that I couldn't take away from the wall without damage. That wasn't the case in the bathrooms. I drained and removed the toilets, took the vanities apart, again even taking off the faucet handles. We even cleaned the edges of the vanities and sinks to remove plaster, and when we were finished, it looked like a pile of used bathroom fixtures. Only a few pipes and cut-off valves poked out of the walls. The tub and shower stall were untouched for the same reason I left the kitchen counters. Next, I took the bed and dresser apart as much as I could. The bed was easy, mattress, box springs, and all came apart easily and were stacked in the hallway. All I could do with the dresser was empty it. All my wife's clothes were put into our bedroom closet, which of course no longer had the pretty louvered doors. Our furniture looked nice and was actually very expensive, but like a lot of furniture nowadays, it's screwed together. We bought most of ours unassembled. I disassembled everything that originally came that way. My wife hadn't lifted a finger to help put them together. The shelving units lay in pieces on the floor. The credenza that held my booze and all my wife's little knickknacks was collapsed, with all the hardware carefully bagged. I wanted to make sure nothing was damaged. The last things to remove were the ceiling fans and light fixtures from each room. The only thing I left was the chandelier in the dining room, but I took the light bulbs out of that. Oh yes, I removed every electrical switch and plug socket in the house. We capped the wires, even though the electricity was off. I had to contract out for the air conditioning system to be installed, so I left that alone. I'd put in the water heater myself but left it intact as well. Now, you may be wondering what I did with all the stuff I took out of the cabinets, shelves, and off the walls. Well, I wanted none of that stuff as it would remind me of the 35-year-old cheater, so we spread it across the floor of the master bedroom. I mean, every dish and glass, every little figurine was placed carefully from the front of the closet to the door. You couldn't walk from the door to the closet without clearing a path first. Well, I take that back, as the door wasn't there anymore either, nor were there any doors hanging except the exterior doors, which I left in place for security. I explained before I'm an accountant. Well, I kept a receipt for everything we bought to put into that house. My wife and I paid for it out of our communal assets, so I was going to give her back half of those appliances and fixtures, just without the work or what I called sweat equity I had in the house. My wife had done virtually nothing to help except pick out the appliances and help plan the renovations. I kept a few of the mobile appliances like the coffee pot and microwave, that sort of thing. It'll give my ex something else to argue about. I got some appreciative laughter. By the time her plane set down at the airport, everything in the house that I had assembled or installed had been taken apart. I got a call from the process server, who handed her the divorce papers and sat back to wait for her to come home. Sophie, the secretary, had driven them to the airport in her minivan, so she dropped them off. My brother and I were waiting with a couple of the neighbors who wanted to see the rest of the show. They'd been watching me take apart the house all week and could testify to where I had been and what I was doing while waiting for the cheaters to get home. We had been consuming the contents of my liquor cabinet and eating the steaks from my freezer. I'd kept back all the rest of the food and taken it to Emma's mother's house earlier in the week. I told her my freezer had gone out, but that didn't explain all the canned goods and condiments I dropped off. The poor woman was too confused to ask what was going on. I knew she'd find out before long. Chloe stuck around only long enough to let Emma and Luke out of the van. I wondered why Luke even came home with her. I walked around the front, leaving the others to watch from the side of the house as Emma clambered out of the van followed by Luke, her lover. Both were fit to be tied. Well, she was yelling and waving the envelope she had been given. He was angry, demanding to know what kind of lies I might have told his wife and saying he was going to bury me legally for casting aspersions on his character. I had filed for divorce on the basis of adultery and named him as one of the parties. As you all know, the courts don't really care about the reason for a divorce, but my claiming adultery put a new light on the problem, or rather, added a bit of embarrassment because it would be part of the public record. About that same time, Olivia, Luke's wife, arrived with her sister. I knew Emma's time of arrival, as I had been tracking her cell phone, so I gave Olivia a call. They were on their way. Olivia had already phoned me to tell me part of what she found when she returned home after her weekend away. She asked if I had been to her home that weekend. I told her truthfully I had been working hard at my own house and barely went anywhere else except to my brother's to sleep at night. Apparently, Olivia couldn't park in her garage when she got home. The whole driveway was filled with car parts, not just any car parts, but the pieces that had been her husband's beloved 1972 Ford Mustang. It was his pride and joy, and he would show it off to every visitor to his house. The car had originally been his father's and was Luke's first car. It held great sentimental value. His father had put it into storage, and years later Luke had the car totally restored. I'd heard people laugh and comment that he loved that Charger more than his wife and kids. That might have been an exaggeration, but not by much. Of course, Luke was a little upset to see his wife drive up, and he immediately began with a lame comment that whatever she might have heard was a total lie. She didn't tell him what was awaiting him at home. All of us stood outside while my wife took her suitcase inside. Then came the scream from inside the house. Emma came to the door, screaming, "What the hell did you do to my house?" I knew she didn't have time to really check it out. All she saw was the stuff piled in the living room. I'm surprised she didn't notice the blinds and drapes were missing before she even got inside. I guess she was a little off her game from being served at the airport. Every window was uncovered, since one of the first things I had done was remove the blinds, dismantle them, and fold the drapes. When I turned off the electricity, the only light we had was from outside during the day or the lights from the generator we used. I stepped inside, followed by my brother and the rest of the entourage. I calmly informed my soon-to-be ex what I had done. I was preparing the house to split our assets 50-50ths. She demanded to know where her stuff was. I waved my hand around the floor and then told her if she was referring to her clothes and personal items, they were all safe and sound in the bedroom closet. When she went to look, she was not happy. I had never heard her issue such a shrill scream in all the years we had known each other. Somebody had called the police and they showed up to listen to my wife scream and yell about how I demolished her home. I carefully explained what was going on to the first cop on the scene. He immediately called for his supervisor. I don't know exactly what he said, but within minutes at least 3 more units showed up. I called my attorney when I knew Emma was on her way home and he finally showed up. He apologized, saying he thought he'd better change clothes before he arrived. Emma began to rant about where she would go for the night and demanded I be arrested. My lawyer nixed that last idea, telling the police I had done nothing illegal, no crime had been committed, and that this was a matter for civil court. Luke demanded his wife take him home, but Olivia refused and then frowned at him, asking why he never looked at his phone. She had texted him a few hours before. He still didn't look, thinking whatever she sent him had to do with his alleged cheating. Now, this is conjecture on my part. What he told his wife was that he was busy after Emma was served at the airport and he would clear up any misconceptions about the business trips. At this point, I was trying to monitor 3 or 4 conversations at once. I did answer when she asked what I had done with her car. She and Luke decided that she would drive him where he needed to go since his wife told him he could walk, as she was not about to let his cheating but get into her car. I told Emma, very truthfully, that her car was exactly where she left it, in the garage. She stormed back inside the house. Not 2 minutes later, she stomped back outside and complained the garage door wouldn't open. I told her I wasn't surprised, as the electricity was off, plus I had dismantled the garage door opener. She loudly demanded to know how she was supposed to get her car out. Luke heard her and told her to just pull the emergency release to open the door. She had no idea what that was, so he went inside with her. They came back out, and he demanded to know where the handle for the release was. I shrugged and told him it was around somewhere, carefully marked, like every other item I had taken apart. The police were taking notes the whole time, asking for statements from one and all. Then Olivia dropped her bombshell that she hadn't called the police yet, but she had an issue at her home. She showed her cell phone to the police lieutenant who seemed to be in charge. I watched his face change to total incredulity. He looked at me. I told him Olivia had shown me the photos, but I had been here at my own home all weekend and had multiple witnesses. Unable to get her car out, and with Olivia refusing to take Luke home, they called Chloe back. She arrived disheveled, having been crying. Her husband had met her outside their house with all her clothes stuffed into plastic garbage bags. He helped her load the bags into her van and told her to leave and not return until she saw her lawyer. He had told me his plans the day before. So now Emma and Luke put their suitcases into Chloe's van. Olivia told him once again he ought to look at his phone. He finally did and then let out a scream that almost matched those of Emma. He yelled for Chloe to get him home fast. I'd given Olivia a suggestion when she first called me to tell me what she found, and she had already acted on it. Her brother-in-law had stayed at her home. The cops were finished with what they could do at my house. We'd all given our statements, so my brother and I followed the rest to Luke's home. A television news van was already parked in front of his house. The reporter was interviewing Brett, the brother-in-law, about what the family found when they brought Olivia home from her weekend away. Later, I found out the cameraman had already taken full video of the area. The story Brett told was that they couldn't pull all the way around the house to park in the garage as the garage doors and most of the drive were blocked with car parts. The garage was around the end of the house and the area was totally obscured from street view. Nobody stopped me from following them up to the house. The scene was great. Most of you men have put together model cars when you were kids, I'm sure. Well, what I saw looked just like what you see when you open a model box, with the exception of the plastic bars holding the little parts in place. In the center of the driveway was a car chassis, to each side lay the doors. Behind the car, on the driveway, was the trunk, and in front, the car hood. I was a little surprised the fenders hadn't been removed as well, nor had the windshield. Virtually every other piece was, though. The engine sat in front of the chassis, radiator, fan, water pump, starter, generator, carburetor, and all the major parts had been removed. All the belts and hoses were placed neatly in rows to one side. The transmission and whole drivetrain were sitting behind the car. The wheels were removed along with the brake assemblies, and even the seats were sitting off to one side. I'm telling you, it was impressive. I'd never seen a car totally, or almost totally, taken apart. Everything was laid out very neatly. Not that any of that mattered. Luke lost it. He began to wail and even started crying. He dropped to his knees and screamed, "Charlotte is destroyed." I asked Olivia, "Who is Charlotte?" The television reporter was standing close by while the cops walked around the car, looking over the scene. I can tell you, I fell over laughing when Olivia explained, Luke named his car Charlotte. Mustang Charlotte, like the song. I know you all heard about that part once the news reporter broadcast her report. The story was picked up by the network and then made the full rounds on social media. They played the song Mustang Charlotte as a backdrop. None of us spouses were hiding. We all made sure the three cheaters were named. Luke accused each of us of the damage to his car, but we all had ironclad alibis. Chloe's husband, Ethan, worked all day Saturday at the dealership and was with their kids that night and all day Saturday. He had the expertise to dismantle the car and possibly the resources, but the investigators couldn't link him to anybody who might have been responsible. Apart from Luke's, not a single fingerprint could be found on any part. The police had even checked the lug nuts that had been carefully piled together. Olivia was with her sister and brother-in-law for the weekend, and even her kids testified to that. She loudly proclaimed she hadn't even thought of doing anything to the car, but if she had, it would have been with a hammer, and she was still considering using a hammer on the parts and finishing the job. Even the cops were laughing hearing that. Of course, because of the careful way the car had been dismantled and the parts not damaged, I was the number one suspect, but I also had an alibi. First of all, I am not a mechanic. I know home repair and renovation, not how a vehicle might be put together. I didn't have much more than a couple of screwdrivers and a few wrenches anyway. Plus, I was busy taking apart my home under the amused and watchful eyes of my neighbors. The whole event at Luke's house was a circus. Emma was there because she had no other transportation, other than Chloe, who had been kicked out of her home by her husband. My father-in-law soon showed up after receiving a call from Emma. He stood wide-eyed, watching the extra catharsis unfold. The reporter called me for a follow-up the next day. She'd heard what I'd done to my home and wanted to add that as an angle to her story. I gave her one of the 20 or so flash drives I had made of how I systematically dismantled my home. She condensed 5 hours of video into a 2-minute television segment. Those flash drives proved to save my butt so far. I gave them out like candy at Halloween. Of course, since I only had 20 drives, I'd also included the evidence of the 3 culprits cheating. Luke had gotten a restraining order for me not to publish a thing about his infidelities, but by the time the order was issued, almost all of those drives had been distributed. I had no control when some of the evidence, which included them discussing their affair and even video of a few of their encounters, made the rounds on the internet. Even my father-in-law got a flash drive when he asked me if I might be overreacting to perceived events. Luke was totally embarrassed to be seen switching places with his 2 female partners. It was cut out of the television segments but did show up online. That the 3 were videoed in flagrante delicto was mentioned often, even on television. Now, as of today, my status is still up in the air. I intend to push for the divorce to be finalized as soon as possible, but Emma wants to stay married for the sake of the baby. The paternity test, which my wife initially protested, showed I am not the father of her unborn child. I had to pay extra to get the test expedited, but since the child is not mine, I'll get some of my money back from the communal assets. Emma wanted the opportunity to discuss the matter privately and wait until the baby was born to test, but I had made it so public she had no option but to submit to the test despite her attorney's advice. I have no idea what she plans to do or if Luke will step forward. He might not even be the father for all I know. That's not my concern. My wife got an attorney who claimed I destroyed my home. Mine, of course, claimed I merely took back my work and that none of the components were damaged and everything was ready for resale. From the last I heard, the investigation into who dismantled Luke's charger has come up empty. The working theory is that it has to be a team of experienced mechanics, somebody with the expertise to remove the major components and not leave a total mess. Oil, transmission fluid, coolant, and even brake fluid were drained, and none of the parts were damaged when taken apart. Even Ethan, Chloe's husband, admitted to the investigators what it would take to take the car apart like that. Components that might be compromised, like the manifold covers and valve assemblies, were left alone. Ethan told me privately he would like to hire the men who dismantled the car, as they were fast and obviously knew their stuff. He told me, as much as he loved it, he had nothing to do with taking the charger apart and asked if I had. I honestly told him I had not. Luke paid through the nose to get the parts picked up and stored. Olivia told him he had a day and a half to remove the junk, as she called it, from her driveway so she'd have access to a garage. Otherwise, she'd hire a couple of neighborhood boys to pile the crap under the carport where Luke had kept the car. He knew she was serious. Before any of you think I came out on top of all this, I was not unscathed. The very next day after Emma's return home, I was immediately fired from my job. I knew my boss was a good friend of Luke's. Luke sent him clients and in turn, he recommended Luke when the need arose. My boss had even been the one to originally suggest Emma go to work for Luke. When I was told I was fired, I leaned over my boss's desk and asked him point blank if he had been party to any of the sex play, and more specifically asked if he had sex with my wife. He denied everything, but that didn't keep me from having a little talk with his wife to make the suggestion I suspected he might have. My ex-boss's claim that I was poaching clients was dismissed when I demonstrated that I brought many of them to the firm in the first place. A few others made the statement that they didn't trust the man after he fired me. I've agreed to handle all the accounts who followed me pro bono for 6 weeks while I work for my brother for minimum wage. Emma's attorney claimed I am deliberately avoiding having a substantial income. I claimed I was simply helping friends while I determined my future career. I opened my fledgling part-time, pro bono accounting firm in an unused office in my brother's building. If any of you need an accountant, let me know. I got a few cheers from the audience. I felt a little better about my circumstances, but I had to admit I lost a wife, my home, and my dreams, all irretrievable. 3 weeks later, once again, I walked into the anger management support group that several of us had dubbed Chicken Anonymous. I stepped to the podium. I see many of the same faces here. I guess you're here for the same reason I am. It's hard to get control of your emotions. Well, let me rephrase that: it's hard to keep them under control all the time. As mine, I'm sure your therapists say, it's a fine line between depression and anger. I talk to both the therapists now. To be honest, it wasn't my choice. I know some of you had to come here because the court mandated it. I'm here because my sister-in-law demanded it. We were all sitting at the dinner table, and my 8-year-old nephew asked loudly, "Uncle Mark, are you pissed off all the time because Aunt Emma was such a cheap street hooker?" Well, pissed off and hooker are key words for my sister-in-law. When asked where he heard that, my nephew pointed at me and said he heard me talking to his dad. My sister-in-law looked at me to fix the situation, so I said very carefully that it's really not polite to use the word hooker, but yes, I was very upset with Aunt Emma. Then I hit the trifecta of keywords when my nephew said, "Okay, I won't say that again. I like her. It's too bad she's a 35-year-old cheater." You can imagine the glares I got from my sister-in-law. My brother was no help at all. He just stared at his plate and shook as he tried to keep from laughing. My sister-in-law told me very quickly that if I wanted to keep my boys, I'd better learn to watch what I said around the kids. Now, my 6-year-old niece got into it and said, "Boys. I didn't know Uncle Mark had any kids. Where are they?" My sister-in-law said the boys were me, her dad, and my brother. Then the little 6-year-old, bless her heart, said, "Oh, so when you told Miss Sandy your girls were sore and tender from too much rough play, you meant because I fell and skinned my knee." To be honest, I didn't hear how she finished because I was laughing too hard, but my sister-in-law was beet red. Okay, long story short, if I want to live with my brother and his family, I continue my therapy, including these group sessions. I announced I cannot afford to live on my own right now. I have no income. I wanted to decrease what I made for the divorce, but people don't realize how difficult it is to even find an apartment without verifiable income. My sister-in-law is a lovely woman and generous to a fault. She just doesn't want her kids influenced negatively by my misfortunes, more keywords to go along with those others I mentioned. So where are we? Apart from my getting my sister-in-law upset about what her kids were picking up listening to my conversations, over the last 2 weeks, I have done the minimum regarding making an income. I had only made marginally more than Emma had before I was fired. I personally felt she was paid so much because she was providing her boss extra services. Of course, my lawyer told me to keep my mouth shut about that, as our minuscule difference in income means I wouldn't pay alimony. He told me not to mess that up. Olivia kicked Luke out and filed for divorce. His beloved car, Charlotte, is somewhere in storage. Their divorce, as you might imagine, is already messy. She told me in no uncertain terms she is looking for any way to flay the idiot's meat off his bones. I know she meant that metaphorically, but I hope I am never called to testify if something physical happens to the man. Luke is having some major troubles at work. Most of his business comes from corporate clients, and somebody has put the bug out that possibly some of his negotiations may have been sweetened by sexual favors from Emma and Chloe. All three adamantly deny that, of course, but apparently some clients are taking the possibility seriously and are taking business elsewhere. The firm, in general, has had some problems with other areas as well. They have been handling sexual discrimination and harassment cases. Some of those clients have changed attorneys and filed grievances to the bar, saying the firm cannot handle their own internal affairs when it comes to sex in the workplace. I understand Luke's continued presence is more of a liability than an asset, and he is close to being asked to leave. His situation at work has been made worse by the number of people driving past his office playing Mustang Charlotte by Wilson Pickett at full volume. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I hate it for him. Not. While I like the idea that he may be out on his ear, Emma's income may take a nosedive. Her salary is very high compared to the average for paralegals, especially with her short time in the field. Again, there have been aspersions that part of her pay is for her sexual services. The same has been said about Sophie. Of the 3 cheaters, Chloe is the only one who might keep her marriage intact. She is trying her best to reconcile. She told her husband she loved screwing others with her strap-on, she just liked the power she felt. She claimed she never allowed Luke to have sex with her. She admitted that while mostly it was one-sided, she did enjoy a little private girl-on-girl action on occasion. She's playing the child custody card as hard as she can. Ethan told me he is considering keeping their marriage intact if she'd agree to a post-nup agreement. She has convinced him that the sex with clients rumor is false. My marriage, on the other hand, is over. I wouldn't keep Emma even if the baby were mine. All we need to do is split the assets. The judges, and I use that term in the plural, since Emma appealed the original decision, declared I was justified in taking back my own sweat equity in my former home. I had not damaged any component but merely uninstalled them and left them ready for reinstallation or sale. I gave Emma possession of everything I had placed in our bedroom, but she had to pay the bill to pack and remove it all immediately, or I would consider it community property. Her father helped her pay and coordinate that. I wanted the stuff out of the house quickly but refused to lift a finger to help. Emma tried to get me to help so we could talk. I refused to talk to her without my lawyer present. My sister-in-law went to observe and make sure Emma only took the stuff from the bedroom. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law finally viewed the files I gave him and told me privately that he understood my actions but was still obligated to take care of his daughter. I think Emma moved back into her old room at their house. At our first joint meeting with our attorneys as part of the separation of assets, I suggested Emma take her half of the household fixtures and appliances. She could pick out what she wanted, and I'd take something of similar value. She glared at me when I told her I'd give her first choice of toilets. She wanted to buy out my half for face value, saying she would hire a crew to put it all back together. I knew what she and her lawyer were thinking, the whole was worth much more than the sum of the parts. As an accountant, I also knew how much I could afford to offer her and still be below the break-even point. I kept offering more than her as a counter. She couldn't get the financing anyway. I couldn't have on my own either, but my brother was backing my play financially. Emma refused to sell to me for any reason. Her attorney eventually demanded everything be sold at public auction and the proceeds split. My attorney argued weakly that we would lose too much. He lost that decision, which did not bother him nor me. Emma had tried but couldn't find a buyer offering nearly as much as I had offered. My brother originally offered to buy the shell of a house for half of what my ex and I had invested, but she refused. At auction, he finally got it for 70%. The house was in great shape, but few of the investors were willing to outbid my brother. I'm sure several of those investors were interested but knew my brother would never work for them again, and other people in the trades would have followed suit. Emma's lawyer protested his client's lack of compensation briefly but had to concede the auction was his client's demand, and they had unfortunately refused my much higher offer. So basically, I lost my money settling my divorce, unemployed, and with only a small percentage of my assets left. I am still living in my brother's guest room. To compensate him for my rent, I began work to restore my old house. Everybody knows I was the one who took my home apart, but nobody has any idea of who dismantled Luke's beloved charger, let alone begun to provide a bit of proof. Luke even hired his own investigators. All have come up dry. My financials were examined to see if I had anyone help. I had to provide them access to my cell phone and computer. Chloe's husband, Ethan, also had no link to anybody who might have done the deed. The whole affair has been fodder on social media after originally appearing as a topic on network television. You can imagine the notoriety I get as the man who took my house apart. I am constantly asked how I really took the charger apart and promised they'd never tell. Then I get congratulated for something I did not do. Several of the guys stood and congratulated me on the spot, to the laughter of others. I stepped away from the podium. The therapist asked who wanted to go next. All shook their heads. One guy said he'd wait for next time to tell how he grabbed the guy screwing his wife by the balls and marched him naked out of his house and down the street. We all headed for the bar. "Hey, Mark, don't I rate a little discount as a new client?" Liam Harris asked. He was the drywall subcontractor I'd met at Chicken Anonymous. "I seem to remember you gave the guys who followed you when you got fired from that other firm 6 weeks of free accounting," he continued. "Hell, I gave you a free setup in my system," I offered with a smile. "That takes some time. You think you deserve more? You do work for my brother, not me. My house already has all the walls up." I was referring to my former house, which my brother now owned and rented to me for a minimal amount. I'd be buying that house back for what my brother paid for it in a year or so when we figured enough time had passed that my ex-wife, Emma, could not claim fraud. Or is it because I offered all the guys at our group a discount to do their taxes this year? She asked. "No, none of those things," Liam grinned. "I figure I deserve it for my strength pressing on a floor jack to lift a charger up so the wheels could be removed. I'm not much of a mechanic, but I can stack parts around. Also, for telling your brother I knew some guys who could help out in a bad situation. And especially for my cousin, who is a mechanic, when he told me about a charger he wanted dismantled," Liam said, trying to stifle a laugh. I almost couldn't see through tears of laughter as I marked his account paid in full for the next year. Thanks for watching. What would you have done in Mark's place? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more crazy stories. See you next time.